Good afternoon or good evening, listening audience, depending on where you're listening from in this magnificent world we live in. This is Michael Cross with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where our motto that I point out every week is question authority. That is one of my favorite statements from Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers. If you're in the United States, it's probably a good idea to be studying up on our founding fathers, especially in light of our fantastic guest we have tonight, Cheryl Chumley, who is the author of Police State USA. Hello, Cheryl.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Hey, no problem. I think I'm going to really find this an interesting segment, because this is one of those issues. It just seems that people outside the United States, unless they travel to the United States, are somewhat unaware of. And you being a writer for the Washington Times, as well as an author who's investigated this kind of stuff, I think you can shed some really good light on it. Now, I'm just going to start out just one thing, though. My wife she's from Sweden, and she said that when she tells her relatives and friends about the direction of the United States, this whole police state direction, they kind of go, what? You got to be kidding. I don't see that on movies and TV shows and stuff that we get in Sweden. How would you respond to that?
Well, I guess I would say first and foremost, that's good. We still have the reputation of being a freedom society around the world. So in that sense, I'm cheered by that doubt that she receives from her family and friends. But on the other hand, she's exactly right. The direction the United States has taken, specifically since September 11th, but in more general, broader terms, since the progressive movement started in this nation decades ago, the direction has led us to a state where the federal government, the state entities, the local governments are encroaching at every level in all aspects of human activity. And what's become is the most alarming thing is that our greatest asset as a nation, that of the founding fathers painting our American individual rights as coming from God, not government, that is being flipped on its head. And if you look at America now from inside, it seems like most Americans are looking to government, not God, for the solutions of all their problems.
Yeah, from what I've read from your book, you seem to be more of a proponent of the ideals of John Locke, then. Yes.
Limited government is the best government, in my view. And that, in fact, is what founding fathers based our government upon. The idea that the individual is the one in charge of government. The idea that government is set up solely to preserve and protect the individual rights that come from God for each American. And once you lose that, which I believe we are fast on the way to losing, once you lose that, America loses what separates her from all other nations.
Okay, but don't you think that Michelle Obama knows what your kids should be eating for lunch?
Yeah, Michelle Obama is a pet peeve of mine, to be honest. Her entire healthy eating initiative not only is a slap in the face to every parent, and I'm a parent of 4 children, so I speak from firsthand experience on this. But it's not only a slap in the face of parental rights, but it also has the extra added bonus of coming from somebody who's not even a duly elected member of the government. Michelle Obama is the first lady. She has no policy-making abilities by the Constitution. She's not elected to speak for anybody, and yet she's used her platform to go farther than, just simply advocating healthy eating and making a case that Americans should eat healthier. And she's taken it and she's actually ramrodded through Congress and through our cabinets, the ability to regulate what schools in our nation feed our children.
Well, I've heard of, there was a school, I think it was in Utah, that got in trouble because they didn't shut down there's something about they didn't shut down their Coke machine or something at a specific time, and so therefore it was available during lunch or whatever it was, and they got fined for that.
Well, there's a lot of cases going around in the nation when the media chooses to report on them, that is, where different schools have rebelled for different reasons against Michelle Obama's healthy eating regulations. First and foremost, a lot of the students, particularly those who play sports after school, are hungry. They're crying that the school lunches, while they sound good on paper, what comes across on their food lunch trays is barely enough to get them through the rest of the day, never mind their extracurricular activities. And a lot of schools say that they have been losing money because they're forced by Michelle Obama's regulations to offer these lunches to students. Students are wasting them. They're not buying them. And the schools, in turn, are seeing revenues drop at a dramatic rate.
I'd love to speak about this or a whole bunch because, like you brought up something. I was on the swimming team when I was in high school in Oregon, and even though I might right between school and practice, I might stop and grab, a big, huge, unhealthy meal at McDonald's. I burnt that all off after practice. After an hour and a half of intense swimming, it goes away.
Like you, I was an athlete also. And, you burn a ton more calories when you're an athlete. But, next to that, teenagers in general burn a lot more calories. That's why their daily calorie levels are set higher than, a 50-year-old adult. They burn a lot more because they're growing. And, that's all beside the point. Really, the main point is who has the right to tell children what to eat or offer children food choices? It's the parents. It's the guardians and caretakers. It's not the First Lady of the United States.
Yeah, but we seem to be seeing, and I'm going to lead this more and more into the whole police state mentality, but we see more, it seems to me, more regulation of children in schools. If they don't sit still, well, you got to diagnose them and give them drugs. If you see children playing in a field across the street, the police will often question and even arrest the parents for letting their kids do things that, anyone that's grown up before this period was almost expected to do, to go out and explore nature and do all these fun things. And it seems we're cracking down on that, even drawing pictures on a sidewalk with chalk that gets washed away the first rainstorm. We see the police being involved in that.
Yeah, it's a crazy system. And if you look at just what's going on in our public schools across the nation, students, star students who are on fast track to Ivy League colleges make the mistake of bringing in a knife because, in one case, a girl who was headed to an Ivy League college, she mistakenly took her father's lunch to school. Inside was a small paring knife because he used it to peel his apple when he was at work. And what happened was she got suspended from school. Her Ivy League hopes pretty much disappeared overnight. That was a real knife, but there are other cases where a student brings in a plastic knife, can't even do anything with a plastic knife, or leaves something in their locked car in the school parking lot, that was partially hidden under the seat, such as a knife or a jackknife, Army Swiss knife, and so forth. And these students find themselves in massive trouble, not just from the school authorities, but as you point out, they bring the police in on these cases. And overnight, students see their, all their hard work in high school and their hopes for college disappear overnight because of no tolerance policies and a crackdown on how students should behave.
Well, it's really sad, I think, because in many countries, they really try to encourage students to have critical thinking and so forth. And it seems that rules and rules and rules. I was reading an article about some girls that got, some yearbook pictures taken, and the school photoshopped one girl's really tiny tattoo out of the picture because they didn't feel it was appropriate. And many schools have measuring tape. Well, we got to measure your dress to make sure it's just right or something like that. And I just remember going to school, if you went to school in the 70s or the 80s, it was pretty much just an assumption that, well, you dressed appropriately, but there was no set rules. Now there is extreme, point A, B, C, D type of rules.
This is true. The instance you refer to about the photoshopping of school yearbooks, a couple months ago in Utah, which is in America, that's a big Mormon territory, which is fairly strict religious principles involved with that. But the photoshopping out there occurred because students girls specifically wore shirts that basically were sleeveless, and the school authorities found that offensive and inappropriate. The big problem there was that some girls who wore sleeveless shirts had their shirts photoshopped to show that sleeves were added, whereas other girls who wore similar type tops with no sleeves did not have their photos photoshopped. So there was a little bit of arbitrariness to that angered a lot of people. As far as what you're saying about, students nowadays having rule after rule about what they can wear to school, some of that is a backlash on the school's part, because students in recent years have started wearing some really provocative outfits, and sometimes with T-shirts that are aimed, that have slogans that are aimed at creating some kind of response, and they're proving disruptive in class. Some girls wear skirts that are so short, there's no way that, you can sit in class and not be a disruption to other students. So some of that is a backlash. Others of it, though, again, the parents should be in control of what their children wear to school. And if parents aren't doing the job, that's a fault of the parents. It's not a responsibility or a right for the school to step in and regulate.
Yeah, and, well, again, I want to jump into some other stuff here. The ACLU just recently came out with a report dealing with the use of SWAT teams and how this has evolved since the advent of SWAT teams back in the 1970s. And it seems nowadays, it's to the point that I've heard of cases where someone checks out a library book and it's overdue and they get SWAT teamed. What's going on there?
Yeah, the ACLU has done, usually the ACLU does a lot of studies and investigations and advocate for a lot of policies that anger conservatives. But in this particular issue, which is the militarization of police, the ACLU has done a lot of good work that has united people from all political parties. And the big issue is the police in the United States have moved in recent years from becoming a force aimed at protecting and serving the general public to one of a more intimidating and aggressive in nature, specifically because of the September 11th terrorist attacks and their stated need to remain vigilant against all forms of terrorism. And what's happened is the Department of Defense offers through its Pentagon 1033 program the ability for local police departments to obtain at low cost or sometimes even no cost military-grade equipment that's right off the battlefields of, say, Afghanistan and Iraq. And this equipment includes Kevlar's full-body armor, weapons, and so forth. But it also includes MRAPs, which are mine-resistant, ambush-protected armored vehicles, and other forms of armored vehicles. So the police get all this equipment, and because they have it, whether they paid for it or not using taxpayer dollars, the mere fact that they have it, that justifies them to use it. Police argue that they have the equipment, they want their officers to remain safe on the job, so anytime they have to serve a warrant, say, in a high crime neighborhood or a warrant on a drug suspect, they are more apt to use this type of equipment than they ever were before. What happens is, and we just saw a case a few weeks ago in Georgia, is some of this police type aggression runs amok. there was a 19-month-old toddler who was sleeping in his crib in a home in Georgia. The police, dressed in SWAT-type gear, stormed the home at 3 a.m. in the morning because they had a no-knock warrant to search out a drug suspect. Once in the home, one of the officers threw a flashbang grenade. It landed in the baby's crib. The toddler had his face half blown off, spent 5 weeks in the hospital in a medically induced coma, was finally released a few days ago, but has suffered burns over his whole body and has, years of medical treatment to go through. Meanwhile, the police are still on the job. And it's instances like this that the ACLU points to rightly that need to come to an immediate stop in America. And the only way to do that is to scale back some of this police militarization that we see going on.
Well, I remember I watched a documentary. It's a really good documentary called The Power of Nightmares. I think it was the third segment of that. It's from the BBC. It hasn't been taken down on YouTube. It's a good one to watch. But they were dealing with the repercussions of 9/11 and how politicians have learned how to use the psychology of fear to stay in office. And one of the things that there was a cop interviewed, and he said something like, well, I don't know what a terrorist looks like, so I always have to keep my eye out on everyone. And I think that's very, very telling about the attitude of the police in the United States today.
It is, and I can tell you the last few weeks on some of the radio shows I've done, they've had call-in opportunities, and some of the callers who have telephoned in on air are either former police officers or existing police officers, and they say the same thing. They say the training that's been going on in recent years in police academies across the United States is almost a tone or almost a message of shoot first, ask questions later. It's not like police are randomly just gunning people down and then trying to question them, but that the tone has shifted to such a degree that even police officers, those with several years experience on the force, are becoming alarmed at this tone shift. And what's happening is innocent Americans are being regarded in police officers' eyes immediately as suspects for the simple so-called crime of walking down a street. And that's what you describe about the fear, the tone of fear that's being generated. That's something that's a big red flag.
Yeah, I mean, I used to, I used to warn people when I would go with them, visit places like Russia, to try to avoid the police. But now when I hear that someone's visiting the United States, I actually encourage them, if you don't need to talk to a policeman, try to avoid them at all possible cost.
It's kind of a sad commentary what you say, but that's not a bad piece of advice, because it's not just police officers watching you walk down the street and feeling, are they looking at me as if I'm a suspect? The police have now at their disposal certain types of technology where you're actually placed under surveillance absent your knowledge because they are trying to root out suspects. Some of this technology even includes, science fiction type stuff come alive where they're actually trying to predict crimes before they occur and not just keep that intel to themselves as a heads up, but actually act on that advisement, that technology and those warnings, and respond to those communities and start acting on advice about, potential crimes before they've even occurred. This is stuff that's right out of Big Brother, Orwell type novels. And, it's real on the streets of America right now.
Well, it sounds like, that sounds like the movie, what was it called? Was it Minority Report? Was that the one with Tom Cruise?
Yeah, it sure was. I didn't see it, but you're right.
Yeah, and the sad part is that, when that movie came out, it just seemed like, okay, that's sci-fi, but they could never get that advanced. But if you really read up on a lot of the psychological research now, especially stuff that, we get a trickle from what comes out of DARPA. They've got some pretty sophisticated techniques of scanning people and knowing what's going on in their minds.
They sure do. The police have at their disposal backscatter vans where they can basically, as they roam through the streets and do their street patrols, they can peer in to vehicles and so forth, with the X-ray technology that's in these vans. They can peer underneath somebody's clothes and see what's in their pockets. And these are all searches and surveillance operations that are conducted absent a warrant, which, the Fourth Amendment is pretty clear. If you're going to search somebody, if you're going to search through their properties, you need to have a court warrant, meaning you need to show just cause. But all this type of technology is, plowing forward at the hands of police around the nation. And it's mostly pushing to the side the constitutional rights that our founding fathers forged.
Well, speaking of constitutional rights, if we take a look at what the NSA does, Am I being too paranoid if I tell people that maybe when you get out of the shower, you might consider getting dressed before you open your laptop up and start doing your search through Facebook?
Well, I don't know. Cheryl Atkinson with CBS, she had that breach on her computer. So there's no telling, like you said, there's no telling if your camera's being peered into or not, really. I wouldn't stand undressed in front of my computer just because of little thoughts like that. The NSA hasn't been caught doing that, but they have been caught doing plenty of other things against innocent Americans. And the tone hasn't shifted enough in this nation to put a stop to those type of surveillance operations.
But at the same time, if you send a picture of a husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend sends a picture to someone in a text message, that's all preserved, from my understanding, in the NSA database.
Yes, the NSA did. The NSA does do operations on social media sites. They do scan, all your messages and communications on computers. But the difference is, they say they're not just randomly scanning innocent Americans. They say what they're doing is targeting terrorist suspects. And if you're an American who happens to be in communication with one of these terrorist suspects, or during their pursuit of their terrorist suspect communications, they stumble across your message, that gives them the right under the Patriot Act and so forth to, look into the messages you as an innocent American have sent. There's been all kinds of allegations and accusations that the NSA has abused this surveillance technology, and in some cases it's been found that both the NSA and the FBI have conducted surveillance operations on social media sites used by innocent Americans, unbeknownst to those innocent Americans. And as you point out, there are 72 or so data centers around the United States where all these communications and data collections get sent, stored, categoried, and, preserved for an untold number of years for reasons that still aren't clear to those whose data has been swept up and placed in those centers.
But at the same time, we're talking about that Minority Report, trying to predict someone's behavior based on what they've been doing and, previously. And it seems like it'd be very easy to build a psychometric profile. As Edward Snowden pointed out in his recent interview, I don't know if all of that got played in the United States, but he said that they even have programs by which they see how long you spend writing something, and if you erase it, like if you're sending a message on Skype or Facebook or something, and put something different, that can lead them to be able to better predict what your inner personality and behavior and so forth could be. And therefore, if that gets connected to local police departments, then they may know more about you than you know about yourself at any given moment.
Exactly. And let me give you an actual example of what happened in Virginia just in the last couple years of how this data collection and how this government operation, surveillance operations, plays out on an innocent American citizen. There was a former Marine, his name is Brandon Robb, and he lives in Virginia. And what happened was he was corresponding on Facebook, not just on the public pages of Facebook, but on his private Facebook site where only invited participants can see what he's posted. He put up what some would claim are anti-government messages. What he claimed were songs, lyrics of songs and so forth. Regardless, it was messages that he put up. And what happened was he got a knock on his door. It was federal and local law enforcement officials demanding that he come outside. And what happened was they arrested him. They didn't charge him with anything. They cuffed him. They put him in a vehicle, a police vehicle, and they took him away to jail. To make a longer story briefer, what happened was they saw, the law enforcement saw his Facebook postings and became alarmed that he might be committing an act of violence. So before he actually committed any act of violence, they went to his house and arrested him. But they couldn't charge him on anything because there was no crime he had committed. So what they did instead is they placed him, they put him in a psychiatric facility 3 hours away from his home to undergo behavioral and psychiatric profile testing. Meanwhile, his mother contacted, an attorney to find out what was going on. 5 days later, it turns out that the police had absolutely no just cause to arrest Brandon. They were forced by a court who ruled that this was completely ridiculous and arbitrary on the part of police officers. The court ruled that he had to be immediately released. But he turned around and, of course, he launched a civil rights lawsuit and so forth. But this was just in 2012, and this was in small-town Virginia. And this was a guy, a decorated former Marine, who was just simply posting some stuff on his private Facebook message site. So his big question still is, to this day, how did law enforcement get a hold of his postings to even, surmise that he might be committing some sort of violent act?
Well, and you also have to wonder what they consider suspicious behavior. I mean, you said something about he was posting songs. I mean, I'm reminded that Korn recently turned out a video that was questioning the NSA. I can't remember the name of the song, but you wonder if you go to that, are they keeping track? Oops, it goes to these kinds of songs. If you're an educator and you want to find out what's going on around the world, of course you're going to want to surf through sites that might be from organizations and so forth that, the U.S. government might consider questionable, but you're still trying to find information. And it seems that people might start getting scared to start visiting social media or alternative media, I should say, that questions the government because they're going to be worried that the next time they go to the airport, they're going to be informed they're on a no-fly list.
Right, that is a fear. And, just to give another example of how police are being trained to respond to suspicious citizens and report these people to, the data centers around the nation. The Los Angeles Police Department at one point had in its policy that if you see somebody in a public park scribbling in a notebook or perhaps taking photographs outside a government building, that person's information, perhaps you can track him to his car and take a snapshot of his license plate of that person and so forth. That person's information should be reported and fed into one of the data centers around the United States to create a file just in case it turns out some government entity down the line needs to tap back into that person for some sort of crime that's committed or act of terrorism or operation that kicks off where it may lead back to that particular park or government building. This is data collection that's going on around the nation, starting at the local police department level and being fed through the data centers all up the chain to the federal entities. And most Americans aren't even aware anymore of what they're doing. That's suspicious.
Well, two things. One is I don't ever shop at Walmart, but do they still have those telescreen 1984 type screen, with Janet Napolitano, with the see something, say something thing?
Oh, yes, the see something, say something is still in effect. But I'm not sure if they're at Walmart.
Okay, and then, well, they used to be. They used to be. I know that. But then there was also I saw this video that was out there that was a training video, and I don't know if it was from a fusion center or something like that, but they even showed, like, if you're in law enforcement and you see someone taking a picture at a reservoir, that's supposed to be suspicious activity. And I was just thinking, I've gone many times up in the mountains, and I might be at a really beautiful reservoir or something like that, taking a picture of the lake, and I'm just wondering if one of these times when I do this, that some policeman's going to suddenly start coming up and questioning me as why I'm taking pictures at a reservoir.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's the problem. You don't know. You're just an innocent American going about your daily business, and next thing you know, you could have a police officer asking you, why are you taking that picture? And what do you say? If you say, I'm taking the picture because I want to, and this is America and I can, does that bring even more police heat down on your back? It's a little bit walking on eggshells in America right now. As I said, it's ratcheted up since September 11th. But, people really need to be aware of what's going on, because if you're not aware of the atmosphere that's being generated on the police front in America right now, you have no way to fight it and turn back the tide.
Well, and on top of that, the idea is that there is no law that I'm aware of that says you have to carry an ID on you all of the time. But I mean, you get a situation where I saw something about some lady that was jogging in Texas or something, and she didn't have any ID because she was jogging. How many times do you think, okay, well, I better take my wallet with me when I'm jogging? Right. And she got, the cops, I don't remember if they arrested her or detained her or whatever, but they were pretty physical with her. And again, this is something that before 9/11, you didn't even think about the idea of having an ID unless you were going to a bar or something and you needed to prove your age.
Right. That's just right out of Nazi Germany or something, that you have to show your papers, show your ID. And, police also, they get very sensitive if you try and videotape them during a police stop, or if they're apprehending somebody on the street and pedestrians walking by. Everybody has cell phones now. Somebody starts videotaping them. There have been instances, and I'm sure you've seen the YouTube videos also, where police have gotten very aggressive and intimidating with those who dare to videotape their actions. Well, like you mentioned about no law against not carrying an ID, there's no law that prevents an American citizen from videotaping police on a public street either.
But you might get beat up anyway.
Right.
I mean, the thing is that if you just type in police brutality into YouTube, I mean, it's pretty shocking. Hundreds of thousands of videos. Now, some of them are duplicate, but still, even if you say 10% of them are originals, you get some pretty scary stuff out there that just about anyone could be pulled over or dealt with.
Well, I agree. And, I'm on the side of police, to be honest. I support police, and I think that they try and do a good job and protect Americans. But at the same time, it just seems like these last few years that there have been far more instances of out-of-control police acting as if they are part of the military force and not the civilian sector. And, even a handful of police like that, the perception that they're leaving Americans with is that the police are taking it upon themselves to be the regulators, the judge and jury, in instances where Americans aren't even doing anything that merits any type of, police action. And it's just something that Americans really need to be aware of, that your local police officer, the mindset has shifted to a more aggressive tone.
Oh, absolutely. Now, in our last few minutes here, I know you're busy today. I wanted you to, I see that the population, even though we have the internet and we can connect in so many different ways, it seems that the larger segment of the population, I don't know if it's because they get their news from, the alphabet corporate networks or something, or they're not studying history in public schools anymore. Right. But what do you see as a solution to all of this? what do you see that people could do to try to turn the tide? Because if it doesn't get turned, I think we're going to see something that's going to make 1984 look like some sort of hippie commune.
Right. There are plenty of solutions. None of them are overnight, but an immediate solution people could take to rein in the militarized police in their local communities is, first off, go to your local government boards, your local city councils, your local county government, county supervisors. They're the ones that actually have the purse strings over the police departments. Ask them, do a FOIA request, or ask them outright, what militarized equipment do our police departments have? And press the local government officials to make it, to ban police using any type of military grade equipment, including armored vehicles and Kevlars and, full body armor, except under special circumstances, where there is an actual terrorist threat or there is a massive violent manhunt or so forth. But serving warrants in the middle of the night to a drug suspect, that shouldn't pull out the SWAT team. You don't need a SWAT team for that. So that's one immediate step people could take. A little longer term is people need to read the Constitution. It takes about a half hour. They need to read it themselves and teach it to their kids because the public schools aren't. And even in cases where the public schools are teaching some form of the Constitution, they're skewing the history, so it paints some of these founders even in racist terms in some school systems around the nation. And then once you read the Constitution, at least you're armed with the facts of what founding fathers intended this nation to be. And when you flip on your news at night or read your local newspaper, you can gauge for yourself how far we've come. And you can take up the fight from there where you see the most need in your local community. Writing your congressman doesn't do anything anymore. They don't care once they get to Capitol Hill. So a third solution could be to stop funding the main parties. It doesn't matter who's in office, a Republican or a Democrat. We're getting the same results. They're clamping on individual rights in America. Better use of money is to donate funds to nonprofit watchdog groups that actually do the real fighting on Capitol Hill for the average American. So that's three possible solutions people could put in place now. There's plenty more, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and also, of course, individual candidates who express support for constitutional policies. If you donate, like you said, if you donate to the Republican Party, you never know. Peter King or John McCain might get some of that money.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. There's a lot of Republicans that get up to Capitol Hill and they start siding with Democrats way too many times, and they start pushing these same policies that are encroaching on our individual rights.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, those are some fantastic, not only observations, but also some ideas on how we can start changing things. I just want to throw in one last thing. Local government, one thing you can hit them on, even if you don't hit them on philosophy, is the cost. If you get a military grade vehicle donated, quote unquote, to your police department, it's going to cost money to buy spare parts. And so therefore, it's going to be a lot more expensive than what it takes to upgrade or to maintain your police cars, which need to be used all the time. These vehicles are, I don't know how much they cost, but it must be hundreds of thousands of dollars originally. And then the company that makes them will benefit from all the maintenance that needs to be done on them. So there's kind of this military and there's a military industrial connection there that maybe if local governments were aware of, they would maybe not want to have all of this free, quote unquote, stuff.
This is true. And there's also costs associated with the training. You can't just take the local police officer, away from his cruiser and stick him in an MRAP and expect he knows how to drive it safely, operate it properly, and so forth. So there's going to be, tons of man hours of training that need to go into this. And if they decide to hire a special team, just to operate these types of equipment and vehicles. That's a whole new slew of salary and benefit costs to hire new police officers just for that specific reason.
Wow. Okay. Well, now, your book's on Amazon, right? Police State USA?
Yes, Amazon and WND Books.
Excellent. Well, I hope a lot of people pick up a copy and get better informed so they can inform the people around them and maybe break this trend that's taking place.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate you being on the show. And I appreciate all of our listening audience. And I encourage you to come back next week and visit our radio station again and get the perspective you're not going to be hearing in the local mainstream media. Thank you, and have a good night. Okay. Well, that was a really interesting interview with with Miss Chumley. Remember what I said, author, New York Times, the Washington Times writer. The thing is that I think we need to look at when it comes to this whole issue of the police state is we can take a look at the saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, I believe it is part of human nature. It's not one of those great parts of human nature, but it is a part of human nature that when people are given any kind of power, they seek to magnify it. They seek to take more than what they're given. I mean, whether it's a child always trying to push the limits, or an adult when they try to find ways to acquire more and to get more. If you're given the opportunity to be able to peek into the lives of people, and the lawgiver, the government, gives you that opportunity and then gives you the kinds of tools, the technology that we have today in order to find out anything and everything, the natural tendency is for people to strive to get that power and to use it and find any excuse necessary in order to continue with that particular power grab. And I mean, the thing is, if you look back at the time of the Revolutionary War, the idea was that a person could be secure in their house, and the letters they sent back and forth to each other, that they didn't have to worry that they were being peered upon. And, that's why, we have the Bill of Rights to protect people, allow them to be secure, the Fourth Amendment especially. I remember when I was in high school, come on, those people out there that went to high school maybe in the late 70s or early 80s can remember this, where a social studies teacher would present a case where, you find a policeman oversteps his bounds, but he finds out something bad has taken place. And then you were taught that because of the Fourth Amendment and the basic law of the land, that you had to have a probable cause in order to search someone. And that required a court order that you couldn't use that evidence in a court of law. And these could be cases involving rape. They could be cases involving murder. They could be cases involving all kinds of really despicable activity that police would catch someone, but they would have obtained that evidence illegally, and they couldn't use it in the court of law. Now, the thing is, it's not been that long, a little over 30 years since that time period. And now what's happened is the state has the ability to find out information about men, women, and children all over the world. It's that easy. And you think it's going to stop looking at your Facebook post, looking at what you might write on a blog, or, the phone calls you're making to people, or the searches you do on the internet, the websites you visit, whether those be political websites, whether they be alternative websites, civil rights websites. I don't even care if they're like porn websites, anything that people visit. And that is kept track of. And that can be used to build psychometric profiles to find out what kind of person you are. And maybe you'll never be in a position where the government wants to have that information. But have you ever thought about the idea that if it continues this way, that maybe you might not be, you might find that when you're looking for a job or any job, all of a sudden you don't get contacted, and you're wondering why it is that you're not contacted? Well, you know what? On these things like the no-fly list, a lot of people that have found out they're on the no-fly list have had a really hard time finding out why. And then when they find out why, it had absolutely nothing to do with any kind of threat of violence or even any illegal activity. It could have been political activity that wound them up there, or just a mistake. So this kind of stuff could lead to this in the future. Maybe there will be some sort of blacklisting for people based on their internet activity. But let's take it a few steps further. Let's say we go ahead and we give over all of our rights to this kind of encroaching police state. Now, I watched 1984 again about a month ago, and it was interesting. They had the telescreen that could look in on you and find out what you were doing. And so it was a two-way thing. Winston, the protagonist, had to sit in the corner where he thought no one could see him. And they talked to your neighbors. They, found out what you were doing that way, and maybe they could set you up on suspicion and then build a case against you and then say, well, you're a thought criminal. That is so primitive compared to what can be done today. I mean, okay, let's just say we have the thing where the government knows where you go, what you say, all of this kind of stuff. And let's say you're just a regular citizen. You don't want to cause any problems. I mean, I certainly don't want to go out there and cause any problems, in society. But then I still have to worry about, well, I heard about this one website, or I heard about this organization. I'd like to check it out and see what they say on their website. And then when you have to sit back and think, well, should I really click it on? I mean, does this send some sort of little flashing little red button, a light or something somewhere? A lot of people feel that way nowadays. And so they're scared to kind of look into things and maybe to comment on issues, on internet forums or newspaper, when there's an article that appears online in online publication. But let's take it a few steps further, shall we? Let's say in the future we have a situation in which we veer away from cash. I mean, this is being experimented with. I think one of the countries that usually is on the cutting edge of this sort of thing is Sweden. And there's attempts being made at stores and so forth to try to discourage people from using cash. I mean, when you go and park, for instance, usually you don't put cash in. You just stick a debit or a credit card in, and you do it that way. You can actually pretty much survive in Sweden and anywhere without using cash, just using a card. And I see this evolution taking place, but then if that happens, then you can be tracked. I mean, did you know this? This is kind of interesting. If you use a credit card at a store that uses a scanner system, when you go through, you scan your own groceries, and then you can maybe get further in line when you check out. and you just give your scanner over that, and it's scanned into the computer, and it registers how much you spent, and then you pay and you leave. The thing is that you use a credit card, which most people do, or a debit card, you know essentially what items a person buys. In fact, you can create, back to the old psychometric profile, and companies actually use this. All of a sudden, a woman buys a copy of a baby magazine, or a bridal magazine, and she hasn't bought anything like that in the past. Well, 9 months later, you start getting ads in the mail or online for baby materials, and diapers and clothes and stuff like that, because no one buys those kinds of things unless either in the second case they're getting married, or the first case they're going to have a baby. So then that person has a child coming on, and then you can follow that person regardless if they have any more kids or not. You can follow and think, okay, well, this baby, according to our files, this family has a child who's 2 years old, then 3, then 4, then 5, and you can mark it that way. Now, that may sound efficient, and it's like, okay, well, big deal, so I get coupons for things I like. But also, in places like England, they're setting up things where you can be fined for putting items in the wrong recycle bin. And you know how that works sometimes. If you do recycling, you get a product, sometimes a carton, a fruit juice carton, and it seems like it's cardboard, but the inside seems more like it should go into the metal, because it's kind of a aluminum foil consistency in a lot of these cartons. And it doesn't really feel like paper, but it looks like paper and sort of has a little bit of the texture of paper, but you're not really sure. So maybe you just figure, okay, maybe I'll just throw this in cardboard. Well, the problem with that is that if you have a waste paper basket that is scanned by the authorities, I shouldn't say authorities, but whatever company is in charge of your garbage disposal and recycling bins, and you have thrown stuff into the wrong bins, you can keep track of that, because they may feel, well, this is causing undue hassles when they have to sort this stuff in a more detailed manner. And that can be tracked back to you. So the fact that you scanned that fruit juice carton at the store, that can be tracked back, and it's relatively easy. And nowadays, the cost of microchips are to the point now where it's hardly any cost whatsoever. So eventually you're going to wind up microchipping everything. I've heard like in clothing, a lot of new clothing lines have microchips in them, so that if you come from a country that has a reputation for selling a lot of counterfeit clothes with brand name labels, that you can, if you walk through the airport, and I think they do this in Australia, or they were talking about doing it in Australia, but they're really strict on things coming in from the Southeastern Asian countries where people take a lot of vacations who are Australian. And you walk through and you don't have the proper microchip in your shirt, pants, shoes, whatever, then you're in violation of the law. So even if it might be something that you think you bought it legitimately at a shop, it might be that it's not legitimate, and then you have to surrender those items at customs. And you might think, well, yeah, but I don't take a lot of trips overseas, so that kind of thing doesn't bother me. But everything you buy can actually be cataloged and tracked. And so therefore, throw the wrong stuff in the recycling bin, maybe 5 years from now, you never know. You might get SWAT teamed if you've done it enough times. As if you don't really have to do that much exploration to find some horrendous cases of SWAT teaming for things that you think, what, an overdue library book? Things that, are, you get SWAT teamed accidentally just because someone has a suspicion because, I don't know, maybe you wear a shirt or I don't know, maybe you buy some items at, if you're in the Colorado, at some shirt that has a marijuana leaf or something, and then some neighbor, see something, say something, and they say something to the authorities like, well, I noticed they have a lot of clothes that have marijuana leaves on them and that sort of thing, and maybe they're growing stuff in their house. Well, then nowadays authorities just think, okay, well, we got an anonymous tip, so it's time to go in there and check it out. And you might think that sounds atrocious, but hey, come on, if I'd have said 10 years ago that getting SWAT teamed for a lot of the stuff that happens nowadays, you'd think, no way, that sounds like something from Fahrenheit 451 or whatever the name of that movie was, or Equilibrium or 1984 or something like that. But now it's out there all the time. The sad part about it is, and I'm going to mention this, but I didn't really mention this during the interview. I forgot. The sad part is, first of all, you usually only hear about these abuses of power at the local level. So the local newspaper, for the most part, runs something about a police raid that goes wrong. Someone getting, someone in a domestic dispute, they call up the police because the wife or the husband smacked the other one. The police show up and they shoot the other person, or something. Usually those only get mentioned in the local press. Now, of course, you go on YouTube, there's lots of that, so if you explore, you find this stuff. But for the general, person out there, especially older people that don't use the internet so much, then, they get exposed to a story here or there, but not on the scale you'll see in alternative media. But now here's a very interesting thing that I think is part of the conditioning process. I've noticed, I don't watch too much mainstream TV. There's a few shows I like to watch. I mean, I might, but they're usually cable productions. But, I might like to watch, what is that? The Big Bang Theory or Walking Dead or True Blood and, those kinds of shows. Or, there's some people have told me Hannibal and stuff like that's pretty good. I should check it out, but I haven't had a chance to do that yet. But anyway, but there's all these really cheap police TV dramas. I mean, you know what I mean by cheap. They're almost like they're all the same. They're copies of each other. And you often see these plots where, TSA is presented like, this really professional arm of the government, and they're stopping the terrorists and stuff, or various other government agencies that have sprung up, and they're all of a sudden out there on the far front, and they're the heroes. And this is part of the conditioning process by which you learn that these organizations are the good guys. These organizations that often get accused of using Gestapo tactics and stuff like this are seen in some way as being, protecting the homeland or something like that. And I've just seen when I have channel surfed and hit some of these programs that just seem a little silly. Well, it's all out there. So the problem is the media, they're not going to give you the story. If you have friends out there that just look at you funny when you say, well, we're kind of evolving into a police state, what you need to do is expose them to alternative media. You need to plant the seeds. And eventually you'll break that hold that the mainstream media, government, and general society, this kind of coalition has on the public mind. And the only thing we're asking, get people to think for themselves. Like I said at the beginning of the show, question authority. That's, Benjamin Franklin saying that. I hope to have you back next week for another exciting episode of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is